Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
The Academy Awards are less than a week away. It's been another good run of Oscar episodes here at Below the Line, and this is episode 11. Today, we're talking about the nominees for Achievement in Cinematography, and I'm happy to welcome back returning panelists. First, director of photography and director Patrick Cady, whose credits include Girl Fight, Bosch, and the upcoming Ballard, which will air on Prime sometime this year. Patrick, welcome back.
That's so good to be here.
Really glad to have you as well. Let me introduce our other guest. Next, David Tuttman, also returning, who we know as Tut. Tut, you're a New York-based cinematographer and director whose credits include Wu-Tang American Saga, The Night Agent, and You, which is also on Netflix. Glad you could join us.
Really glad to be here, Skid. Hi, Patrick.
Hey, good to see you, Tut.
This is going to be fun. Before we dive in, the LA wildfires have been very much on our minds this season. And although the fires are contained, the damage was devastating. And the challenges faced by the city overall and the film industry specifically are far from over. To all of our industry colleagues and everyone affected, we see you. Okay, let's discuss some movies. The 2024 nominees for cinematography are The Brutalist, Dune Part 2, Emilia Pérez, Maria, and Nosferatu. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this a warning. Last note, I'm going to recognize the nominated cinematographers by name, but apologies in advance if I mangle them. Patrick and Tut, please correct me if I mispronounce the names of your colleagues.
If we even know how to say them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, I call you out by name because we're all in it together, so.
We might all be in the same boat.
Yeah.
All right.
Apologies in advance.
On all of our behalf, so apologies in advance. First up, The Brutalist, cinematography by Lowell Crawley.
I was really lucky and got to interview him for American Cinematographer. He was really a wonderful interview, and a really, you get this sense when you're interviewing another cinematographer, you immediately feel this kinship with, they've absolutely been where you've been. And he was talking about the VistaVision aspect of the movie, which is not 100%. Like, anyone who thinks the whole thing was shot in VistaVision should know that some of those shots that seemed like they'd be impossible in VistaVision, they did not do in that format because they would be impossible. The opening sequence on the boat is shocking and awesome, and that was done with a 235. And then I got to I got to go to a thing at the DGA out here with all the nominated directors. Sometimes they were shooting scenes with both the VistaVision camera and the 35 if they wanted a second camera. So when the lead meets his cousin off the bus, and there's this beautiful scene of them hugging and him crying, that's they put two cameras on that, and one's the VistaVision's the wide, and then the 35 is the close-up, getting in closer because the operator has a little more flexibility.
They've talked about using the VistaVision cameras, and to you guys, you might understand completely what that means, but give a little background for those of us that aren't familiar with the cameras, both what they're trying to capture and then what extra challenges they might have faced. What's that VistaVision entail?
But you want to explain and I'll illustrate if anyone's watching on video.
Nice. Yeah.
There's no video on this, Patrick. I know the cinematographer wanted, if we were going to put any of them on video, it should be this one, but unfortunately it's just going to be audio.
For those listening, I grabbed the roll of film that happens to be on my desk, 35 millimeter film, and I will let Tut explain.
I remember film. I haven't seen it in a while. It's so nice to see it. Right. So VistaVision film generally travels vertically through the race, and gets exposed one frame at a time by being locked in and then pulled down 1/48th of a second exposure, 1/48th of a second to get to the next frame. And what VistaVision does is it takes the same motion picture film, but takes it and moves it mechanically through the race horizontally. So instead of getting a 4-perf vertical frame, you get 8 perfs across, and it locks in for 8 perfs. So by definition, it gives you a wider frame. And the attraction to that in something like this is you can get shallow depth of field with a wider field of view. You can use a longer lens instead of a wide lens and make your focus more selective, like in that train sequence. And it's much more expensive, but it gives you 3 times more negative area per shot. That's my primitive description.
I think that's perfect. And what's interesting is I saw it projected in IMAX, and the funny thing is VistaVision is still a blow up to IMAX. So the fun thing about seeing it projected is you are watching a blow up, even though it's VistaVision in sections, and so you definitely feel the grain. It's different than seeing something shot in VistaVision and then projected in that format or shrunk down to project in 35. So you definitely feel the grittiness, which makes it feel like it almost, the thing I liked about the film is that it almost feels like it's a period movie of a period subject. Even though it's fictional, it really feels like it could be someone's life. And you really feel the film of it all. The thing Lal and I talked about a little bit was he was especially excited about the VistaVision. There's a sequence where they go to a rock quarry in Italy, a marble quarry, and it's really beautiful projected because the VistaVision is giving you so much more negative, and so you're seeing all these really subtle details. And he does a very beautiful job, and he kind of exposes things down, and it's just gorgeous. Like as Tut and I probably, when we see these images, we probably start seeing charts of like roll off and curves in our heads of, how he's perfectly placing these exposures while at the same time doing very little lighting, so it's a real, I really appreciated his technological prowess.
Especially working in a quarry. I doubt
Yeah,
they had much lighting at all,
yeah,
if any. Just the, but yeah, I thought it was a beautiful movie, and within that, I thought each scene was kind of its visually, at least, its own little movie. There were so many different tones that were taken from scene to scene. The color theme of the movie would change with the cut to a new place, and within that, though, it all fits so beautifully together. It makes sense, in thinking about, they did use four different camera formats in the making of this movie, and I was really happy to see. So my favorite, I love Cooke S4 lenses. I always have. They're just classic, and they're to me they're just like this perfect skin tone rendition, which in this movie they kind of forsook. But I felt as if it was a beautiful classic choice for a movie that did feel in period. It didn't feel like it was a current movie being made at the time in many ways, and I think that all brought that spirit to it.
yeah, it's a lot of wise choices about and it's kind of it's this director's, it's the third in a trilogy of these like false biographies kind of, and it's just really interesting that they shoot on film, and that forces them into certain situations. There's another sequence of them all looking for someone in dusk and fading light, and it is just fading light, and suddenly you get a very 70s version of, all the characters. It's late enough in the movie that all you need to do is see a silhouette against some light in the sky and hear their voice, and you know what's happening, and you do not get to see everything. And you know what? That's totally fine.
Totally fine. There's been a lot of talk in my world about confusion versus curiosity.
Oh, interesting.
And that's what you're posing as part of that to me. How
Yeah.
we involve the world around us and make audiences work sometimes or concentrate sometimes.
The funny thing is to think that a lot of the movies from the 70s that we all hold up and aspire to shoot, if we go back and look at those night scenes, I mean, you've got massive movie stars of their time walking around in silhouette or even being lost. Like in All the President's Men, when he was walking away from the garage, there's that crazy shot that ends with him silhouetted against is it the White House or the Capitol building? And there's just chunks where you can't see him at all because, it's panning with him. The operator could see him when he was really there, but he just disappears and then he pops out in silhouette, and you're like, that's fantastic.
And now, currently, more than just the limitations of the technology, it's the willingness to take risks.
Oh, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Please don't make it what you think is the correct. I'm telling students that all the time. Like, it's easier to make it correct in quotes, and that's probably wrong for your story. Like, you've got to keep having the story influence what you're doing.
totally. It's
Yeah.
the fun of it. Yeah,
Yeah. Beautifully shot film.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I have one more fun trivia fact about this. The 70 millimeter prints of the film are 4 miles long. And and they weigh, if they were unspooled, and each print is 259 pounds because of the
And
vis.
the intermission is running film print.
Yes,
It's timed by the length of film. So just think of that. Like they're paying an every release print for just the thing that says intermission on the screen for however long. Like I wonder.
it was a great family photo.
Yeah.
And has
It's
original
nice.
score through the intermission as well, right? So that's the
Yeah.
editors
Yeah,
got to
No,
keep it
it's
running.
fantastic.
So
And all praise to the projectionists, praise to the projectionists who are running that print as nicely as they're running it. I love that there's
nice,
people out there not just able to shoot it, but to run it too.
100%.
all right, the second film on our list is Dune Part 2, cinematography by Greg Fraser.
I mean, Greg Fraser's a beast. The fact that when Dune 1 came out was also the same year Batman came out. One of them looks like it was shot on Super 8, and the other is an epic. I mean, Greg's a badass.
Big time.
Big time. Yeah. And what's interesting is I think the fellow cinematographers listening to this and even just crew in general, when you see that movie, if you didn't know enough, you might dismiss a bunch of things as being the special effects of it all. And what's happening is it's so seamlessly preparing the footage for the special effects, and it's making all of these very smart visual choices in the middle of massive VFX scenes. I mean, there's a couple shots, even just like the riding the giant sandworm. Like there's one shot that is them calming down before he calls the worm, and it must be like an 800 mil lens. Like every now and then they're just stacking people with these massive lenses. And I think for some of that, like the sandcrawler thing where she's hiding behind the leg and it starts to move and he's running, they did some of that shadow for real, right? And then build the crawler, the rest of the crawler around parts. So it's this insane logistics. I think it's interesting to see something that's logistically has to be so pre-planned, and in some cases, sets built to use real sunlight that then feels like you're there and just experiencing the story. And that's a tricky thing to keep alive.
I read somewhere that there was a Dune sequence which took actually, it was shot over 44 days because the sun had to be in certain places because, it had to be, it's a movie where that type of consistency. I work in TV, where's the sun? Well, we'll do our best to embrace what we can in the best possible attractive way. But the purposefulness, it makes me think of what we were just talking about before. In the Brutalist, it's kind of the opposite. This movie to me it's impeccable big movie photography, cinematography to me. Whereas it's not the same type of risky storytelling in that
It's
way.
very curated.
It's
Yeah.
highly curated and beyond competent. I mean, that's not even a word.
Yeah.
Master.
It's not
No,
even
master.
the
No, it's masterful. It's masterful shaping, like you were
Yeah.
saying. And so it's a movie which, in ways, for both, were very shaped. Clearly, there's an element of this one which has an emotion. It's emotionally counter in a way in terms of the goals of the cinematographer. It feels like, but still telling the story the way it needs to be and should be. It's perfect for the movie.
The thing that I get chills when I watch it, and it's from having made as you have too this transition to directing, is you see them really concentrating on performance in the midst of all this other thing. Like it's a task to keep thinking like you're a student filmmaker when you have all the toys in the world, even on a TV show. When you I came to TV from very small indie features, and to me I was like, oh my gosh, there's a 40-footer here. That's fantastic.
Mm.
And you have to kind of keep the oh well, it's going to work with the bounce card as long as we get this expression part. And so this is watching the mix of both. Like everyone's perfectly lit, but they're still getting it's if this photography wasn't supporting this film, it wouldn't, we might not know about it as much as we do.
Yeah, I'm perfect adverse in a way myself. I like flaws, but within that, to me, this movie demands and got perfect visual storytelling. It really did.
I think it doesn't work as well if it's not. I think that's the
Right.
case for all these films. These films as a whole film don't work as well as they do if they're not photographed the way they're photographed.
Patrick, something you said earlier, because we talked about Dune 2 earlier in the series when we were talking about visual effects. And so I know some of the choices that were
Right.
made, but I was curious, do you think it is common that people might undercut the cinematography in their minds, casually saying, "Oh, that was visual effects that's doing that work"? I mean, that you've mentioned it kind of that some people would do that. Do you think that's common that people discount the cinematography?
I think it might be more common if you're a student listening to this that hasn't tried to blend real footage with effects yet. You might think that the effects team is going to clean up a bunch of stuff for you, and you might not understand how important it is to really know the thing you're trying to make and then give all the elements for that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, I'm hopeful and optimistic that the voters of the Motion Picture Academy all understand how all these pieces need to fit like a fine Swiss watch for you to get this film.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be a big mistake to think like, oh, well, they had the budget to hire these great visual effects people and their problems are solved. It's really interesting watching the sizzle reels, and I can't wait to listen to your VFX podcast because I'm going to. And I was recently working on a show that had a lot of visual effects because it was period, and the people I liked hanging out with, a big chunk were the visual effects supervisor in that team because I was a producing director on the show, and part of my job was to disavow the crew of thinking like, oh, we can fix it later. Like that costs so much money that doesn't buy us any storytelling. So let's use that money for the storytelling parts and let's fix it now.
Yeah, I think the cinematographer's role in a heavy VFX job, and we all have that challenge in TV as well. We're there to give the VFX people the parts they need for their assemblage while making it in the character of the show we're working on. And that's the trick. It's not just giving them a nice shot, it's giving them a shot in the character of the movie or show. And that indeed is the trick. And knowing where what's important to allow that to happen, you know, what's junk, what's not. And that very purposefully ahead of time allows you to concentrate on the pertinent facts, like those shadows of the creatures or the vehicles, so that the proper shadow is there for the assemblage.
Right, because if they do a lighting difference to fake the shadow, our brains are just like, well, that's not right. We
Yeah,
can just tell.
yeah. I will say also, part one of Dune used anamorphics as well as spherical lenses. And part two went completely spherical. It didn't give up on its vistas. And I found that a fascinating choice in these days because everyone's anamorphic hungry, it seems to me. And I don't always understand why. I think they both have their places, but um, it just gave them the chance to do something high powered and natural, ground the audience in a very basic way and let the story be huge and the presentation be
Oh
natural.
yeah,
That's how it made me feel.
I agree. And we should probably also talk a little bit about the infrared sequence.
The Harkonnen world, right, with their black sun, or
Yeah.
however they justify it.
Yeah. I actually took notes on that too. I saw this movie a while back myself, but that was something to be remembered. And I mean, that's just a beautiful technical mastery. And how do you create a difference? Well, there's an internal filter that cuts out infrared light because HD video hates infrared light, basically, and it allows the camera to produce decent skin tones and a relatable world around us. So to create a different planet, a different experience, Greg Fraser had the infrared filter pulled and used an external, what they called visible light filter, which took the regular light spectrum and denied it to the sensor and allowed the infrared to govern how it looked.
And that scene, I think, was originally written as a night scene. And then as they were testing these things, they realized that it would be better as a shot in the daylight to get the way they got it to look. And they had to test a lot of different things because the you can't use the visual radiation is no longer what's affecting the image. So what sand do we use?
Right. Yeah.
Stuff like that starts becoming a choice.
It made me think there's a device we use when we monitor our shots called false color, which I'm very fond of.
Me too. It's a spot meter of the whole frame. I love
Yeah,
it.
it's a beautiful quick reference. And I feel like I want to make a movie in false color. figure out how to make that work. I haven't quite figured out all the math of that in a certain way, how to make sure everything's red you want to be at a given time, being that it's a light sense. I thought it was a really interesting idea, and this kind of goes there almost.
It could be a Predator first person point of view short film.
Exactly.
Yeah, like a sitcom, but in
Yeah.
Predator vision.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to put a copyright on that.
Yeah, again, Dune 2, absolutely worthy of. I mean, I don't think there's a film that I wish this list could be longer. There's
Yeah.
so many good films.
Every one of these cinematographers did an incredible job.
Yeah, for sure.
They're all incredible movies just to watch.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about the third film on our list. That is Emilia Pérez, cinematography by Paul Gaume.
The director is French, and the funny thing is it's the French entry, right? It was the French entry when it was up for foreign, I think, even though it's set in Mexico.
I believe that's correct. And I think a lot of the crew and such is French as well. They filmed it in France.
80% of it was shot in a studio.
That's the part that's crazy. And I didn't realize
Crazy.
until I saw Jacques, the director, talking at the DGA, and he described that musical number at the beginning when she's on her computer and like the world is swirling around her and she's going from place to place. And he was describing how they did that inside, and my brain exploded.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah, and choreographing literally because there's a lot of dance in it, but also how the cuts from one area to another are going to make it feel like it's a continual street, even though they're redressing sections of the stage and coming back the next day to shoot the next part and making it all feel seamless. The thing I really liked about the photography was the rawness of it. I liked that there are a lot of uncontrolled highlights, and it's a non-glossy musical, which I think is really an interesting way to go.
Totally. Not afraid of a spotlight, that's for sure.
No, not at all. That sequence when they're at the dinner, that sequence is just like beaming massive backlights onto people, and like
And you can see them sometimes. They're there, they're in the shot sometimes. It's
yeah,
unabashed theatricality.
yeah, and letting the highlights go that hot, that's a conscious choice. That's not just happening by accident. They're just buying off on it and letting it rip, and it's a really fun way to have this street energy on top of a musical. Really interesting.
Really interesting. A lot of controversy with this movie based upon some choices of statement that a performer made.
Oh yeah.
But within that, this movie was such an incredible combination of tenderness and sometimes anger, music, potential for violence and violence. It hit so many vivid notes to me. I really found it fascinating. It was a movie without a lot of fear, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like this raw mix of color temperatures and uncorrected sources and just the sense of that vitality is about. I think some of the reason it's a musical is because we connect very emotionally to music in a way that we kind of don't connect to anything else. And I think that's a really interesting trick for the cinematographer. How does Paul make that work visually? Like, how do you reflect that visually? And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when they were prepping, like just hear the conversations they're having about the visuals matching the story. And because there's pitfalls, like I think that's the interesting thing about all these movies too, is there are things you could, you know, would be justified in choosing to go another way, and then the movie might not work as well.
Well, I think this one celebrates in a way that kind of, well, it's a fight that this one celebrates its the balls out quality,
Yeah, for sure.
full commitment everywhere you look.
Yeah, there's no half choice.
No, they shot at a pretty high ASA level, which I think helped a lot in terms of letting them make those kind of stark choices with smaller fixtures,
Yeah.
and I think that helped them move through their day and their needs. The camera movements were great. I thought
Oh, yeah.
the blue screen work, the superimpositions were, I thought, so interesting, and it had this amazing again, this amazing emotional contrast going on, and the scene which rang biggest to me was, and I don't want to do a lot of spoiler, but it's when the little girl's singing her song about Papa. So I don't think I spoiled anything there with that. But with that, the lighting had there was a difference to it. There was a just a soft groundedness to it. There's kind of that green, spacey, lasery looking house light, practical, that's governing the scene in a lot of ways. Truly a beautiful, beautiful, practically driven scene to me when I look at it in my head. I feel as if there weren't a lot of other lights working except for those.
Yeah.
And, and it's just kind of magical, other than the lights in the room. And the camera allowed that, I think.
Yeah. And to have those moments of rest in between those big musical numbers, which have a lot of flash in them, is really important because it keeps you grounded.
It's interesting. It did keep you grounded. I mean, there's a character who's supposed to keep you grounded.
Right.
But within that, it's impressive that they allowed you to stay grounded on such a ride.
I loved the whole handling of the Emilia Perez falling in love. That whole sequence
Yeah.
was handled so well, and yeah, it's just very it's deft at the same time. It's sometimes brings out the baseball bat and hits you with it. Like it's it's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful, hard and soft touch. No
Yeah,
doubt.
exactly. Exactly.
It's interesting to hear you guys talk about this one because I'm on record thinking that when you talk about the pitfalls, Patrick, that this movie overall did a big faceplant on those pitfalls in the sense of representation of both trans community and the Mexican community, which I think
Right.
is misguided in how it came together and sort of the thinking behind it. But when you guys talk about the skill that's brought to the cinematography, I'm actually still really fascinated that do you think on that project everyone was just, oh, we're pushing through and just the cinematography is successful in that? Or do you think the cinematographer is like, yeah, I don't know about all of this, but it's going to look good? I mean, how do you approach something like that? And again, maybe that wasn't their mindset, and you alluded to, Ted, a lot of it's played out in the press as it's being discussed. But
Yeah.
but again, you guys are describing just the skill that's brought to really deliver the visuals in this. Where, yeah, I'm like, wow. But the project overall, again, I still feel like on record was misguided.
Yeah, there are some giant mistakes if we're talking about the film as a whole. There's reasons, there are stories, right?
Right.
Um, uh, I think what happens, and it's worth thinking about, is the I've had this happen in smaller regard. You'll be meeting on a film, right? You'll read the script, and let's say the script is written by the director. This happened to me once, more than once. And I feel like in those meetings as the cinematographer, one of the best parts of the conversation to have with a potential director, and it's funny because you need to work to live, right? But at the same time, if you can be honest with, hey, these are the parts of your film that I think are dangerous waters, and that's the reason to make the movie, and that director is like, yeah, that I think is the reason too, then those parts stay very mind forward. So like going all the way back to Girl Fight, like Karn and I had no doubt without even meeting Michelle Rodriguez, but I had no doubt that you could have a story where a woman and a man of the same weight class could box each other and she could win. Like to me, that wasn't a problem. But it was interesting to talk to people about it and have some of them be like, "Yeah, but he's a guy, right? Like he's going to win." I'm like, they're the same. And as soon as you saw Michelle in training, you're like, well, I think our big trick when we were shooting the movie was like, how do we not make it look like she's going to snap him in half, right? And but in having the conversations with Karin, we quickly went past that as a potential problem and started diving more deeply into how do we make the world feel real and these other things. And I think it's frighteningly easy, especially once you start, filmmaking's a weird thing. You're making the museum and the artwork that's in the museum at the same time. You should be walking through the museum looking at the artwork, if that's the analogy I use. It's like it's such a massive undertaking. It's not just making the art and looking at the art, you're making the building the art is in, right? So it's very easy to start focusing on one aspect of it and knock that out of the park. So in this case, the cinematography, you can really be focusing on what those choices are and not be thinking about the bigger message issues that then an audience just goes like, whoa, 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 hold up. Like,
If this movie hadn't looked the way it did, it would not have been emotionally moved at the times I was emotionally moved.
right.
You mentioned something along those lines earlier, and I think that's really true.
I watched it after some controversy was already out in the media, and I was trying to, um, I was trying to watch it as emotionally as possible, which may or may not be being a good audience member. I don't know. Like it is a very hard thing the easiest place I can go to hide from, especially knowing that we were going to be doing this and it was nominated for cinematography. I went in watching the cinematography.
Yeah, me too.
I think for you, Skid, you're going and watching the film because you're going to talk about the film to lots of different people and
Yeah, it's like on a lot of these categories. So I'm trying to bring it
yeah,
all in
Yeah.
this, but it is I will say it is the thrill of these podcasts for me in that you can take something and break it apart and learn something and appreciate something about this work, even if overall, I have a negative reaction to the film. This is still a valuable conversation, I think, for me anyway.
right.
Yeah. It takes a village to make a movie.
It is interesting how you can all end up focusing on, I always think the trick of being a director is and a cinematographer is you've got like 50 people around you all with blinders on, just like my job, my job, my job. And you can like point everyone at the same thing so that it feels like one thing.
Yeah, Jerry Orbach used to say, bullshit, bullshit. My line. I think cinematographers are one of their most important jobs on a set is we are deliverers of truth. People can have all the pie in the sky notions they want about how to do things or what it's going to take. And we're there to break it down into its essentials so it can be accomplished. And within that, we are people who are generally engaged in hopefully a very honest discourse about the options and what things will take. And this could be a movie where you're, no, and I don't know. I think there's probably a lot of pride in the making of this movie for Paul Guillaume. As well there should be. But this could be a movie where his deliver of truth job was the biggest part potentially. This is what it's going to take. I don't know. In which case, well done.
Well, I'm going to move us on to the fourth film on our list. That would be Maria, cinematography by Ed Lachman.
My note on this, I have a little cheat sheet up on the computer here, and my note on this is really simple. It just says his shaping of light is just crazy and has been for a long time.
A long time.
And his understanding of color palette, like his ability to work with disparate directors and create very different color palettes across different films that all make sense.
What are some of the other films that he's done?
Oh, I was just thinking of
He did El Conde, which was nominated last year.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
black and white.
That's
Love
right.
that, which was a black and white movie.
Unbelievable. And then what was the one that he did in 16 millimeter, like a remake of Leave Her to Heaven or something? I'd have to look it up, but
Yeah. I mean, Ed's a senior cinematographer at this point. He's been doing this for decades, and he's also, from everything I understand, people really dig him. He's a really lovable guy from everything that I've heard from people. Kind of a national cinematographic treasure. If I didn't know it was Ed shooting it, the first like 5 to 10 minutes of the movie, I would have been really confused in a way visually. What's with those windows? What's with this daylight? But with it being Ed, I
talk
gave it
about
the
big
chance.
swings, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I gave it within 15 or 20 minutes, all the rules were set, and you understood what was going on, and it was a beautiful reveal for all these different visual treatments. Pretty darn great. Different formats. ARRICAM 3perf as opposed to 12 for VistaVision. This is 3perf ARRICAM. 16 millimeter Arris, Kodak Super 8s, a classic Pro 8 movie camera, and it all plays, it all shows.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It's all part of her life story.
What I was trying to recall earlier, the films were Carol, right? I think that's in 16 and really beautiful color palette. And then Far From Heaven, which
Yeah,
was essentially, oh, Edward Hopper's come alive as a film. And that's, that's just a couple of his movies. There's some cinematographers where half their credit list would be a full career for anyone else. It's interesting you talking about that initial moment of shock because I think I had the same thing and just knew that it would probably pay off, and of course it did.
exactly. Yeah, give it have I know his work well enough to have faith in his experimentation. And
Right.
it definitely there's a huge payoff. Different cameras and formats used for different parts of her life. He used lenses that were contemporaneous with the subject matter. He loves his ultra Baltars, and they're the lenses that made Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil.
You're right.
You know, I mean, he's paying real homage to great movie making of the past every time he takes a swing. It seems to me.
And he's equally comfortable and he's been doing it long enough that it could be film, it could be HD. He's still going to be able to craft it to what he wants.
Yeah,
I loved watching film, of course. It was beautiful to
yeah,
watch.
beautiful. The saturate. I mean, you wouldn't be. I mean, you can saturate video beautifully. I'm really proud of a lot of my digital stuff and the incredible digital stuff we're talking about. Incredible.
Yeah.
But there's a richness, that a lot, and a bunch of that's in the grading, but a bunch of that is in the gels and in where he's putting his lights, and
Yeah.
it's on the negative. It's not being done after the fact.
I love the little kitchen, that scene towards the beginning in the kitchen. I just thought like all the choices there were really wonderful to see. And I always think it's interesting to watch a really gifted cinematographer get stuck in a small room.
For sure.
Like, oh, what you gonna do in here?
It's gotten a little better with cameras that go to 2500 or 3200 ASA.
Yeah,
That
for
certainly
sure.
helps. You can use a lot smaller stuff, and we can be practically driven in a way that a movie camera can't necessarily. Although in
Right.
this movie, he did a lot of practically driven scenes. There's a scene where basically he took the 25 watt bulbs that were there and upped them to 40 to get a passable exposure in black and white, and then ended up using some even bigger bulbs with, some sort of diffusers around them and black plastic, to
Yeah.
shade it properly. But, those are that type of stuff. I love practical lighting.
It's funny, like this is a rare year where we're not talking about a Roger Deakins shot
Yeah.
film. And Roger does that too. That great sequence in the Coward Robert Ford. It's like, well, what would a train do if it was coming through these woods? And they just, he just puts big bulbs where all the regular bulbs would be. And the thing that I said that's the bad part to say is the word just, because it takes guts to make those choices and to chase them down and see what they do.
Because there's a benefit to it, but there's also a side effect which can be unwanted.
Yeah.
And how do you balance that out? And always, it's that mitigation of your risk taking it's a big part of it for sure.
Yeah. And when you have a lead actor and she's doing this really difficult stuff and playing big emotions as small as she can, you don't want to have her walk on the set and go like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I need another 30 minutes. I was wrong."
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And as an aside, not cinematography, I thought Angelina Jolie was great. I was very
Yeah.
impressed with her performance, and I liked how Ed lit her. I thought there was a classicism to it and an elegance. I thought, I mean, we're in a world where unfortunately there are double standards, and lady lighting is an important part of a cinematographer's job often enough. I call it lady lighting sometimes, and I think that Ed showed how great he is at all facets of this game. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's that thing of maintaining quote unquote beauty, but then also letting her be of an age. That's really important.
At an age with a friend named Mandrex. Yeah.
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 Casting Cody Smith McPhee was a genius move. I've gotten to work with him as an actor. He's really gifted. he's got such a great face.
Yeah, really interesting look for that, I
Yeah,
thought. Totally.
he's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this movie too. I wasn't sure how I would feel about it. I guess it got mixed reviews, so I wasn't sure what I was going to see other than great cinematography. But I ultimately thought it was a really well told tale. I enjoyed the movie as a whole.
Yeah, I was more down the middle of the road on the film as a whole, but again, didn't mind watching every single frame.
Yeah, Ed had one really interesting thing to say, which was the notion with film, the grain giving the image depth versus the planar sensation of pixels and digital. That just by the way film's grain is irregular and particles can stack on top of each other, literally in the emulsion, as opposed to this perfect linear array of dots makes a big difference, he said, and it helps him in the telling of the tale.
I wonder if he even thinks about like, the red tones on a film stock or tend to be a little softer because of the stacking of the negative, right? Like there was this crazy thing that happened when we switched to digital where suddenly if you shot a darkroom scene, there was a really beautiful one in The Crown where suddenly this scene where they're all bathed in red was tack sharp and it kind of couldn't be done that way unless you timed the red in if you shot it on film just because the red layer is got the other layers on top of it, right? Like
Right.
there's this thing.
It's obscured, right? Yeah.
And someone with Ed's experience, even if subconsciously he thinks about some of the color palette in film with how it may or may not be as sharp as other certain colors are technically going to be sharper than others, right? I'm not
Mm.
off my rocker thinking that way.
No, I mean, hence in black and white, even why you use a red filter
Right.
sometimes or a yellow filter. Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
and I'd be willing to bet Ed, with his experience, it's just kind of all in there, and
Right.
it's almost this very unconscious experience almost.
It's in the visual
Yeah,
storytelling hopper.
I'm not on that level, but as I get older, there's a lot of it simplifies. I have to be honest in a certain way, and becomes just more comfortably in their knowledge. I don't have to search it out or think it. It's just kind of the conclusion I come to more naturally that makes me comfortable. And I think that's a function of experience in a way.
And I think the fun thing about the experience part too is that you now have answers to the mathematical demons you can't change, right? Like the
Yeah,
physics of how a light falls off or something. You have tricks for getting around.
absolutely. I'm playing a lot of those right now. I've got to drop through a huge window that's only 12 or 13 feet away. And
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
thank you. I can't stop thinking about that.
Yeah.
One of the things I like about sitting down with you guys is I feel like I'm always going to learn something, although sometimes I don't necessarily understand what I've learned. So, but you bring it every time. I really appreciate it.
Geeks
Yeah,
like hanging out with each other.
it's true. Who else would understand me?
Yeah, who else would understand us?
The final film on our list is Nosferatu, cinematography by Jaron Blasky.
I'm a bit obsessed with a couple shots in this film, and they're probably not the ones people are thinking of. Like there's that amazing sequence cut in the woods that I'm assuming is a false reverse, right? Where he's
Right.
backlit in both directions and it's freaking
Yeah.
like a painting. There's a scene around a minute 59. I had to look it up again last night just to make sure I had it right. With it starts with her looking to camera and then she turns to the vampire. There's got to be a light cue in there somewhere. And suddenly she has just enough eye light on her downstage eye that we still read the shape of her face, but in a very specific way. And the film is full of those moments. There are times where I think my memories of the film are black and white, even though it's a color film.
I feel that way too. I keep thinking about it as a black and white movie. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
It's interesting. Oh, I thought I was a little hesitant to admit that on a podcast.
No, I think it's just so true to its material that it goes there.
Right.
I wrote something about there because the very selective use of color. I wrote a note: selective use of color to enhance quality of black and white.
Yeah, it's exactly
Because
right.
I because I feel that way. It feels like it's this beautiful respect to the movies from which it and stories from which it comes. I really respected that.
Me too. And I feel because I come from lighting, I always think of these, I kind of notice the lighting things first, but it's this mix of, there are a couple really like very specific, once again, I'm improperly using the word just, it's a pan, but it's 90 degrees to something else, and both sides of that move look phenomenal and taken care of. As a cinematographer, I'd rather shoot opposing coverage than one camera straight at someone and the other camera like 90 degrees to them. Like,
Right. Or have room for a bunch of flags to keep the setups almost independent or some
yeah,
it's an intricate setup is what it comes down to make that
yeah,
work.
yeah,
Certainly not easy to do on television time. It probably took a bunch of time to get that.
yeah, for sure. And it's very shaped. And um, what's interesting is I don't know if it's Yaron or Jaren's work before this, but now I want to go investigate. I feel probably some of my compatriots do know their work more than I do, but it's really impressive.
And it's funny because we're talking about details within the shots, but there's also a lot of discussion. Mr. Blasky talked about using the Baltars to suppress fine details,
Oh, funny.
to get that drop off,
Right.
around it, that bokeh that's so well known for. And I feel the same way. I feel as if there was a tremendous amount of our understanding of the sets and of detail, physical details on bodies, and it's all there. Despite the fact that he's seeming that they're wanting to keep the mist-like appearance, keep it in the world of dreams and fantasy, but there's also this amazing reality in what's punched to me, and
Yeah, and I think that's the idea of that a horror movie can succeed if you are shown something that you can't quite look away from, right? There's those two schools. The like, well, if I pan off as it's happening, your imagination is worse than you can, you know, it's good that Jaws you don't see the shark all the time, right? Because that's
right,
scarier in your mind.
right,
But then there's this other world of we're just gonna stay focused on him doing horrible things to people,
yeah,
and you're going to wish we weren't, and we're going to do it this way. Like, this is the way we're going to approach it. I really love this movie. I felt
me
like
too.
the whole time I was watching, I was like, oh, yeah.
It's a very intimate movie, really.
Oh, well, yeah.
You
And
know,
it's about, yeah, it's about a whole bunch of things. It's interesting. It's about a whole bunch of things that other movies are getting wrong. It's like, the fragility of the woman, and it's like, well, no, she's going to save everyone.
and the weight of obsession.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun that they're exploring these things that you would hope in our modern day have just become tropes and aren't worth still exploring, but sadly here we are. They're still worth exploring, so why not use a horror movie, as they often are, to pick at these social things.
Zombie movies is the communist threat. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason the Universal monsters were so popular was because the whole country was turning into teenagers, so everyone felt they were monsters.
I
That's true. It's the baby boom, if you think of the timing.
love that.
Yeah. Skid, what did you think?
I really enjoyed that film as well. And Patrick, in your defense, I also have faults and memories of it being black and white. When I thought back to
Right?
All
watching
of
it,
us,
yeah,
yeah.
just to I think it's very
I
common with
saw it
this.
months ago, and when I picture it in black and white. I totally do.
Yeah, I went to go look for the scene, and it came up and I was like, oh, right, it's color. I completely
How cool is that, though? I think
It's
actually
awesome.
I think that's actually not a bad reflection on the
No.
effectiveness of the cinematography. They put it right where they want it in a way.
Oh, yeah. And I think some of it is the really bold, and I don't know, some of those wide shots, I don't know how much is post, massive power windowing and how much is the decision there, but there's still the decisions. That great wide shot at the casket with all the rats, and
Yeah,
you know, it's just awesome. Willem Dafoe being
he was great
amazing.
as always.
Well, this is a pretty competitive slate of films, you guys. But as we always ask, any additional 2024 movies that caught your eye on account of the cinematography?
I have a list.
And I haven't seen a lot of movies, so I honestly really kind of don't, sadly.
Totally fine. Ted, it looks like Patrick has done the homework for both of you. So,
Yeah, Patrick.
Patrick, what do you want to throw out?
I'd love to throw shout outs to the ASC nominees for the like bigger budget and then the this other category we have that tries to find wonderful cinematography and maybe films the public doesn't know. So ASC Awards, the additional nominees are Alice Brooks for Wicked. And if you've gotten to see her talk about the making of that movie in any way, you would understand the massive undertaking it was. And I think in the Academy, it might have befallen not being dark or something, right? Like it is a ridiculous achievement, her photography in that film. It is shocking. And the culmination of her having done several really well photographed musicals on the way to it. And then Conclave has some phenomenal shots in it. And then A Complete Unknown is the other ASC nominee for cinematography for a feature. And I think what's interesting is Faden is so good at making these like you could watch that and not think of if you're not a cinematographer, you would not know how much work is being done to make A Complete Unknown look the way it does. I think it's a very subtle hand, and sometimes a lot of our compatriots' work gets lost because it's subtle. And then smaller movies that you should be looking for. Well, Nickel Boys, the photography and the storytelling choice, which essentially, in my mind, when I was watching that movie, I had a moment about 20 minutes and was like, oh, I am watching a piece of art that could as equally be in a museum as it could be on a movie theater. And I love that they just went for it in the first person point of view aspect of the storytelling. It is purposefully brutal to be stuck in that point of view in that story, which serves the story well. And then Naui is a story that is worth looking at for both the story and the cinematography set in Africa. And then one of my favorite looking movies of the whole year is The Girl with the Needle, which is black and white and is unbelievably photographed. And then the other two that haven't gotten any nominations or anything are Vermiglio, which is a very soft looking northern light film set in I think it's the Italian Alps. And I grew up south of Buffalo, surrounded by snow, and I just was blown away by, I could kind of tell, like, okay, if they are on stage for any of these interiors, they've perfectly gotten the way light comes in a room off of snow. And if they're not, they deserve all the credit in the world for shooting in what must be so much snow, even the interiors. And then a weird one that I'd like to shout out is Longlegs. Andres Arochi. I just thought that was really beautifully photographed for a genre film. I think that's someone to keep looking out for, if I got their name right.
Thank you for giving me an awesome list.
Yeah, I saw about half of those, Patrick, and so there's some on there that I haven't seen yet either. So add them to my
Oh,
list.
cool. The ASC does this thing called the Spotlight Award, and it's really interesting. Hopefully it shines a light on those cinematographers and those movies because they tend to not be noticed unless both aspects of those stories are great. And the sheer logistics of that Joe Mofre had to undertake for making Nickel Boys be the way it is that's a big problem to solve.
That one I have seen, and yeah, I think I was very impressed as well with the cinematography on that. It really you couldn't tell that story that way without that approach, I think.
It's rare that I see a film and I think like, okay, this is a completely different way to tell a story, and it's challenging me and it's working. Like it's making me feel the way I think it wants me to feel.
Just one more thing. We've been talking before we actually got started, and we felt it would be really nice to say something about where the business is right now to all of our brothers and sisters about the difficult year we've all had, and in talking about these amazing undertakings and the incredible accomplishments of hundreds of people. We're in a really tough time as a community right now, and I just want to say there isn't a day where I'm not thinking about all my colleagues and what we're up against right now.
Yeah, agreed. We're all out here fighting to try to keep ourselves afloat and work in this medium that's so beautiful and requires all of us to work together to succeed. And I just hope that we all survive it, and we get to see each other on set soon.
There's nothing quite like it, is there?
Yeah.
Although not active on sets these days, I do share those sentiments as well, and I appreciate you guys saying something. On that note, we'll call it a wrap. Always great having you guys here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for asking me to do this. It's a real honor. I appreciate it.
It is. I really look forward to this. It's great to see
me
you
too.
guys.
It's wonderful to see you. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah.
Programming note, we were aiming for 13 episodes this season, but it looks like we're going to tap out at 12. We were hoping to do a preview version of Casting, which will be formally recognized as a category by the Academy next year, but it didn't come together. Still hope you're keeping up. Subscribe now if you haven't already so you don't miss what we have to share. As always, I appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info on our website, belowtheline1word.biz, that's B-I-Z. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. To all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.